It's no secret that Battlefield 5 has underdelivered, both from a financial perspective and also in terms of player expectations. In what seems to be the norm for games released under the EA banner nowadays, Battlefield 5 stumbled out of the gates amidst controversy and concerns around the quality and quantity of what it offered. While the critical reception was mostly positive, the general consensus was that it simply wasn't finished. It had more than its fair share of glitches too, but neither of these problems were entirely to blame for its lower than expected sales. The game's marketing, along with EA's, shall we say, less than amazing PR, didn't do it any favours. Now, just like Battlefront 2, Battlefield 5 is a live service doing away with the paid expansions of previous titles. This was a direction that most people felt was the right one, but of course only if the promise of consistent quality updates was kept. So, in the 7 months since launch, how are things looking? What kind of changes have DICE made? Have they managed to turn things around? And of course, is Battlefield 5 worth your time now? It's fair to say that EA's marketing for Battlefield 5 and how they handled the reaction to said marketing was a complete train wreck. This turned a lot of people off the game, and it sold roughly half the number of copies during its first week that Battlefield 1 had. To understand how they got this so wrong, let's go back to May of 2018 and back to that infamous first trailer. It positioned the next Battlefield as both a historically accurate shooter and as a progressively inclusive title for everyone, and its reception was, well... At the forefront of this criticism was a female character who featured prominently throughout the trailer with what appeared to be a bionic arm. This seemed to imply a less realistic and more arcadey Battlefield than what many fans were expecting. Now, just 2 years earlier, Battlefield 1 had been criticised for the opposite, for sticking too close to reality and not having playable female characters. These would be added in later, albeit via premium DLC, but clearly DICE and EA wanted to avoid the same criticism again. There was also evidence that a less historically accurate depiction of World War II could be successful. 2017's Call of Duty World War II not only let you play as a woman, but also allowed you to choose your race. There was some resistance to this, but it didn't seem to significantly affect the game's sales, so allowing the same choice in Battlefield 5 probably seemed like the right move. The fault with Battlefield 5's marketing wasn't entirely based on the fact that there would be playable women though. Battlefield has generally always been positioned as a realistic semi-hardcore shooter. Even the Bad Company games stuck pretty close to reality, whereas Battlefield 5 tried to have it both ways. It wanted to be both a realistic World War II shooter that catered to its core fanbase, and an arcadey experience that would appeal to a broader audience. The reaction to that hodgepodge of a first trailer was ultimately confusement. The core fans almost unanimously hated it, and the casual audience didn't really know what kind of game it was supposed to be. Fans took to the internet to voice their anger, and it wasn't long after the trailer launched that the Not My Battlefield hashtag started to trend. This was bad enough, but EA's handling of the backlash only made things worse. A clearly frustrated Patrick Soderlund, who was then the chief design officer at EA, told fans at the time to either accept it or don't buy the game. A few months later, leaked images from an internal EA event showed a company that seemed totally indifferent to its customers. When the game shipped though, pretty much none of the controversial content from the first trailer was present. There were playable women, but cosmetic options were extremely safe, and there wasn't a mohawk or mechanical limb in sight. Even now, after dozens of updates, new skins and other cosmetic items have remained more or less historically accurate. Now, if you ask me, EA weren't trying to make a political statement here by making the game more diverse. They would have a wealth of player data and they'd know the demographic breakdown of their players, so making the game more representative was probably a calculated attempt to bring in a larger audience and increase profits. It's pretty normal these days for marketing and specifically trailers to misrepresent and overhype a game. In this case though, Battlefield 5's marketing completely failed to describe what would eventually launch. It appealed to neither the Battlefield fans or the mainstream, and it may have had something to do with the substantial layoffs in March of 2019. Now, if that first trailer was the only exposure you had to the game, then you'd be forgiven for tuning out. And if that's true, then you're probably unaware of just how much has changed. Battlefield 5 was definitely light on content at launch, but more so than that, it felt unfinished. From coming soon labels throughout the menus to missing modes, and of course a large number of bugs. In my original review, I said that the core gameplay, maps and progression were a clear step forward from Battlefield 1, but it was still hard to recommend to anyone except die-hard fans. 6 months down the line and a few big updates later, we're finally starting to see the game that should have shipped in November. Battlefield 5 has had plenty of updates since launch, and while most of these have been good, not everything DICE has added has been worth playing. The PvE mode, for example, feels extremely slapdash, and some of the limited timed events haven't been a great fit for the Battlefield formula. There's honestly been too many updates to cover everything, so I'm just going to mainly focus on the significant ones. So let's cover the content side of things first. Since launch, more than a dozen new vehicles have been added, as well as 2 new maps, I'm including the Firestorm one in that count as well as 20 new weapons. For the most part, this is a decent amount of new stuff to keep players busy. 1 new map for the base game in 6 months is kind of disappointing, but there are at least 2 new maps confirmed for release in May and June. The new vehicles and weapons in particular, and the challenges to unlock them, have certainly done a good job at preventing things from feeling repetitive. You can now buy DLC weapons with either company coin or the premium currency. So if you missed out on one of the timed challenges because, I don't know, you don't spend your entire life playing Battlefield, you can work towards them at your own pace. There is an element of pay to win here because some weapons can only be bought with real money. It also doesn't seem fair to give paying customers more options than the peasants. But that being said, none of the new weapons will instantly put you on top of the scoreboard. The weapons themselves have mostly been excellent, adding not only more strategic options but also variety in terms of gameplay. They're also just generally fun to use, like the M28, which has an undermounted grenade launcher. The same can be said for many of the new vehicles, such as the tanks. These aren't just more of the same, they fit nicely into specific roles. Take the Archer for example. This isn't as versatile or durable as the other options, but it can be very effective at taking out infantry and other tanks. A new map called Firestorm was added into the rotation for the big modes. It's a wide open design and one of the largest maps in the game. It initially received some pretty mixed feedback, which resulted in DICE altering it to be a bit more infantry friendly. It's still not a fantastic map if you're on foot, but if you're a fan of blowing shit up in a tank, this is sure to hit the spot. In terms of game modes, there have been various limited time additions such as Rush and Squad Conquest. The vast majority of these have done an okay job at keeping things fresh, but none of them have felt on par with the vanilla offering. Speaking of not on par, the Combined Arms game type is definitely a low point. This is a PvE mode where you can squad up with your buddies to take out incredibly stupid enemies and complete uninspired objectives. The only redeeming feature is that they can be an easy way to complete some of the more difficult assignments that reward you with weapon skins. Other than that, they're some of the least fun co-op missions I've experienced in a very long time. Another addition that is generally seen as a fail, but I think is kind of practical, is the training mode. It's very limited and not particularly useful for advanced players, but for newbies and those looking for a bit of experience in the vehicles, it's not a bad option to mess around in. It would be nice if it explained some of the fundamentals, such as the class-specific abilities like repairing vehicles, spotting, or how to top up teammates with health, but it's still worth checking out if you're new. The most substantial addition without question though is Firestorm. This is Battlefield's take on the popular Battle Royale genre, and my personal feeling is it's the most enjoyable attempt at BR to date. It added a huge new map, new vehicles, and new mechanics. I won't go into the specifics of why I think it's so good. If you want to watch a full review of Firestorm, I did one a little while back. What I will say is that it complements the existing suite of modes quite well. It's not going to be to everyone's taste, but it added enough new content and changed up the Battlefield formula enough to make it feel like a worthy addition. One thing I will complain about Firestorm though that I didn't mention in my review is that there isn't a server browser for it, and this means that in Australia at least, finding games can be pretty hard. In the week of me putting this video together, I couldn't find a game at all in any of the 3 modes, so an option to browse games based on ping and location would certainly go a long way. Now the other type of content that has slowly been growing in size is the cosmetic items. There's quite a bit to choose from now, but don't expect to see anything outrageous. If you were hoping to outfit your character in a neon deadmau5 helmet and nothing but his underpants, well, that's not yet possible. But the elite skins, which are a full outfit rather than separate items, have added a bit of pizzazz that's been missing in this area. Cosmetic items can be unlocked with either the currency you earn by playing the game, by completing assignments, or by spending real money. So this seems like a good point to talk about the premium currency and also the microtransactions. The option to purchase Battlefield currency, or boins as some of the community have labelled them, came in April. You can spend points on cosmetic items like skins, on time savers such as XP boosts, and also on weapons. As I mentioned earlier, none of the weapons you can buy are significantly better than what you can unlock through regular progression. You can also purchase some weapons with the currency earned in-game, but the fact that you can buy weapons with real money does create the opportunity for a pay-to-win scenario. The cosmetic items in particular is where it becomes clearer as to why Battlefield 5 allows more diversity in its avatar creation. The more options there are to create an avatar that you identify with, the more likely you are to spend money to unlock them. Now, the most expensive pack of points that you can buy at the time of me making this video is roughly $60 Australian, which is currently more than the game costs in most shops. This gives you 6,000 points, which equates to roughly 4 elite skins at their full price, or 5 to 6 new weapons. It's definitely not the most expensive in-game purchases I've seen, although they're far from cheap, but for the most part you can unlock everything with regular play. So for now, while I don't love this system, it could be a lot worse, but having said that, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Now, outside of new content, there have been numerous changes to mechanics, balance, and bug fixes. DICE have done a pretty good job at listening to community feedback in this department. Not everything is perfect, of course, but just about every aspect has seen some kind of tweaking. Player animations have been refined, mechanics such as the bipods have received multiple updates to make them more usable, and modifications to the UI have all improved the experience. Even the long-standing issue of player visibility is due to be updated in the not too distant future. Matchmaking, on the other hand, hasn't really improved. I've kind of come to accept that finding games when partied up or relying on the matchmaking in a DICE game is a lost cause. Unfortunately, the issues with finding games in Firestorm isn't isolated to that mode. Getting dropped into empty lobbies or it taking upwards of 5 minutes to find a game is pretty common on PS4 in Australia. Using the server browser is usually a reliable workaround, but for such a high-profile game in 2019, surely this can't be the best that DICE can manage. Battlefield 5 has come a long way in 6 months, and yeah, it's still pretty rough around the edges. It isn't the best Battlefield game ever, but I think it has the potential to get close. As far as it being worth the full price of admission, I think that it definitely is now. It's still pretty light on single player content, but if online multiplayer is what you're looking for, then there's plenty here to keep you busy. If you were disappointed by the lack of progression, customization options, and the general level of depth in Battlefield 1, then I can highly recommend jumping in. If you've enjoyed previous Battlefield games but were turned off at launch for one or more reasons, then I think you might want to take a second look. Battlefield 5 in its current state is a solid shooter, and definitely worth your time if you enjoy large-scale battles, intense gunplay, and messing around in tanks. Anyway, if you like this video, like it. If not, dislike it. If you've got any comments for me, drop them down below. If you're not subscribed, do that. Hit that notification bell because that's a thing. And otherwise, thanks for watching.